For those of you listening who are professional brewers, I'm here to tell you that planning brew schedules just got easier. Starting now, Imperial Yeast guarantees that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 3 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. A rad deal from a rad company. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery yet, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. At this point in history, I think it's safe to say the United States has solid brewing roots, but it unarguably pales in comparison to other regions, such as England, where beer has been brewed for longer than the U.S. has been a country. With a rich tradition of ale brewing, English brewers are responsible for a number of classic styles still enjoyed by drinkers to this day. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this short and shoddy episode to talk about the delicious British Golden Ale is contributor Matt Del Fiacco.
Actually, it's a really interesting lead up to this, because this is definitely one of the English styles that is, it's considered more recent. It's something that has been developed, relatively speaking, especially for Europe and for England in terms of styles. This is a fairly new one. And it's also one that I would argue the American brewing scene has had a pretty heavy influence on, and the way in which it's defined and enjoyed. So British Golden Ale is underrated, just in general as a style. It is such a delicious beer, and I don't see them around ever, and it's upsetting. At least, and this is maybe a point where I've been corrected in the past, and I'm thrilled to be corrected. It is in England, you can see them all over the place.
Yeah,
is a British Golden. It's a huge portion of what's being sold, and obviously, I've been over there a couple times and tried a lot of different styles of it, and it's always fantastic. But here in the States, it just has not caught on, and I don't know if that's because we have pale ale that's kind of competing in the somewhat similar, or blonde ale is also it's a gray territory in there. So I'm super pumped to talk about it, because it is more like British Golden Ale evangelization for me at this point.
Getting the name out there.
Me doing my preaching. Exactly.
Right. Well, in today's world of highly hopped IPA, which I am completely cool with, I appreciate the crisp drinkability and relatively unique hop character offered by British Golden Ale. Over the years, I've made my fair share of batches using a typical approach. And Matt, you recently brewed one up where you employed a bunch of corner cutting methods. We're going to be digging into this style in depth, as well as the results of that short and shoddy evaluation in just a bit. If you like what we're up to over here and you want us to keep doing it, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy. By committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up later this month, February of 2020, is none other than Mitch Steele of New Realm Brewing out of Atlanta, Georgia. Mitch is also the author of the book on IPA and is the former brewmaster of Stone Brewing. We're all very excited for this session. Past guests have included folks like Chop and Brew's Chip Walton, Vinny Chilurzo from Russian River, and hop expert Dr. Tom Shellhammer, as well as so many more. All past sessions are available on our private Facebook page, so you can go back and watch them whenever you want, as many times as you like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who have an array of amazing purpose-built stainless brewing products to improve your brew day. If you're looking for a high-quality pilot brewer, you have to check out the BH15 single-tier system. This thing is just absolutely beautiful. Comes with a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Head over to brewershardware.com to see what they're all about, and make sure to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Okay, listener Mark Prosser wrote in with a bit of a correction for us on our recent episode on Kvike pitch rates, which, Matt, you were there with me on that one, so you get to respond to this as well. Mark said, guys, I loved the Kvike pitch rate episode and the experiment even more. But come on, larsblog.com. It's www.garshall.priv.no/blog. You can remedy this blunder by letting people know that Lars's book, Historical Brewing Techniques, The Lost Art of Farmhouse Brewing, will be coming out this April and is available now for pre-order. Mark says he already secured his copy and that the table of contents looks Amazing, Mark. Thank you so much for this correction. We are huge fans of Lars's work, and I presumed that the name of his blog would also redirect to his site. It doesn't, and in fact, I actually looked into purchasing larsblog.com, but my goodness, somebody's sitting on that thing for $2,400, and sorry, Lars. Anyways, we did make the mistake. Matt, how did we do that?
So in my defense, the blog is called Lars Blog, so that is a point to help. That said, that is such a terrible oversight on my end, and I'm incredibly sorry if anyone was confused by it, or if obviously, if just generally like the fact that it was inaccurate. That's horrible, and I'm sorry about that as well. Obviously, Marshall, you read out the correct URL. Hopefully, people got to the right place if they did try to search Lars Blog, and honestly, any chance we get to support the work that Lars does, and especially like his book, Historical Brewing Techniques, Lost Art of Farmhouse Brewing, I am 100% on board with doing that just because of everything Lars has done for the community and all the work he's done helping me out with the Kvike experiment. So yeah. I'm more than happy to be corrected on that. Like and that's the thing. Like, I get emails every now and then that's like, hey, like I don't want to bother you, but this thing was incorrect, and would you do this? Please, like, I'm 100% fine with having been wrong as long as we can then be right and make it better. So yeah. I'm glad that we had this opportunity to correct it, and I'm glad to continue to support Lars's work.
Absolutely. As my wife will attest, I am often wrong about things, and she's often the one pointing that out. So, again, that the just so that we can right our wrong here, the Lars blog domain name the URL is www.garshol. That's garshol.priv.no/blog. Absolutely fantastic blog, and we love Lars for doing it. All right, if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com. or leave us a note on social media. Last month, my buddies and I reviewed a tasty melomel made by Mark and Pappy Pellicle, and it was called Beleriand. It was absolutely delicious. Well, I mentioned they sent me another interesting concoction. This one they call Beleaguer, which is a blueberry melomel blended with an aged, I think I'm saying this right, Acerglyn. That's a mead made with honey and maple syrup. Mark and Pappy said they actually soaked some oak chips in maple syrup before making the Acerglyn must, with the hope of adding even more character.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
This is grape juice?
All muscled up and toned, body of Christ. Kind of want to make it my own.
It smells like grape juice.
I'm not drinking this without the cracker.
That is totally wine.
It's not wine.
It's sweet barley wine.
Stop saying barley wine.
Okay.
This is wine.
It's wine, 100%. It's good.
It's good. All muscled up and toned, body of Christ.
Damn.
It's almost like a grapes. What about if it's a grape cider?
Right.
It's obviously not booze. It is booze, but it's not. There's no fizz.
It seems strong.
It tastes like apple. We'd call it a cider.
This is a grape knee-high?
I'm tired of being afraid. Are you tired of being afraid?
I'm not afraid.
Let's not be afraid. Let's call it a grape cider. Do I have your buy-in?
It's grape knee-high soda right here.
There's no soda.
It actually tastes like the jug of red wine.
So I'm going alone on this one?
I'll travel along with you in Jersey.
What do you think it is? A Pilsner?
I thought it was just like a strong barley wine.
I'm sorry for calling you stupid.
Okie dokie.
Let's go with you. We're going to call it a barley wine, even though I know that's not what it is.
It's definitely wine.
I'm sorry. Sometimes I bully you, but you know that I love you so much.
It's actually
good.
It is good.
There is actually that barley wine hotness to the end, which means there's some alcohol content in this. I know what that is.
It's strong. It's very strong. It's like 11.2.
How about this? We settle. Grape cider barley wine.
Done.
What if I were to tell you that it uses honey?
That changes nothing.
What if I was to drizzle honey on your chest? Would that change your opinion? No. We've already decided this is a grape cider barley wine.
Yeah, I like it. I'm going with an 8.
I'm going with a 7.
I totally get how the guys thought this was a red wine. In fact, I wrote down that it tasted like a Cabernet with subtle blueberry and honey flavors in my notes. Full, rich, absolutely delicious. I've had some really good meads in my day, as well as melomels, but I got to be honest, these melomels that Mark and Pappy sent me may be some of the best I've ever had. It was my first experience with an Acerglyn, and boy, did I enjoy it. Way better than I thought I would, than I expected it would be. Matt, you're a mead person. I know that you actually make mead from time to time. What are your thoughts on all of this?
I mean, it sounds really delicious to me. Like, that sounds so good. Especially, Acerglyn is such a tough one because like the maple syrup ferments out so much. It takes forever for like the actual maple character to sort of come back around and like a lot of aging. So a great idea to, like obviously back sweeten it a little bit with some of the maple syrup and the oak. It sounds really delicious. It sounds like they did an excellent job. It sounds like you also really threw Jersey and Tim off just in whether is this a barley wine? Is it an actual wine? Is it a cider? But I mean, I love Melomel. And Acerglyn, I don't really have tons of experience with. I've only made it a couple times, but it sounds really, really delicious. And it sounds like I definitely think mead, blending is where the magic is at. It's like the fine tunement post fermentation is where a great mead or a good mead becomes a world class mead or a great mead, respectively. So that's really, really awesome, and it sounds really delicious.
Yeah, it was. As I was sipping on it, I wanted you to have some because I know you appreciate meads, melomels, and whatnot. I'll be honest, the Acerglyn part, the maple syrup, didn't come through very strong. Yeah. I honestly do think it mostly contributed to the ABV, and obviously they get to call it an Acerglyn because it had the maple syrup. But the all around overall experience of drinking that melomel or whatever melomel blended with Acerglyn was very, very nice. Mark and Pappy absolutely know what they're doing, and I appreciate them for sending out a couple bottles of their delicious concoctions. All right, if you want your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. When we return from this break, the focus will be on British Golden Ale. We'll be right back. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. This episode is brought to you by Milwaukee-based Spike Brewing, designer and manufacturer of premium quality homebrewing equipment. Whether you're interested in upgrading to a stainless steel fermenter like the incredible Flex Plus or switching to a turnkey electric setup so you can brew inside and avoid the cold, wet winter, Spike Brewing has the solution for you. Visit spikebrewing.com/brewlosophy today and let their team help you figure out what you need to make the most of your brew day. Again, that's spikebrewing.com/brewlosophy. Spike Brewing. Pursue what's possible. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. When I think of British or English beer, my mind immediately goes to lower ABV, slightly dark, malt forward with earthy hop character and fruity esters, served slightly warm with minimal carbonation. But in my experience, this isn't necessarily the case for British Golden Ale, which to my understanding is a very new style compared to classics like mild and bitter.
Yeah, I mean, British Golden Ale certainly can hit a few of those boxes, but it definitely is playing more into maybe like what is more modernly popular. For example, like the BJCP and their style guidelines for this style mentioned that it was started to be produced to take on like mass marketed lagers at the time. I don't know how true that is. I suspect there probably is like grains of truth in it, or direct truth, very well maybe. But at the very least, what we do know, and this is both in the BJCP guidelines. It's in the Campaign for Real Ale. It's in their definitions as well, that British Golden Ale was really developed as a style like in the 1980s, which is like in England's beer history is a baby. Like it is brand new in that regard.
Well, and it's interesting because I think about this attempt for non-lager brewing regions at the time. Everyone's making lager these days, but to try to match this explosive growth of pale crushable lager by kind of using the resources they've available to them. So in my mind, when I was reading about the very, very short history of British Golden Ale, at least as it's written, all I could think about was the American attempt, which is cream ale, and how it like British Golden Ale is England's version of a much later version, sort of cream ale, right? I mean, kind of like trying to get this thing that's blowing up and making breweries a lot of money, matching it using the ingredients and the techniques that they know.
I mean, if true, it has certainly succeeded to a degree because British Golden Ale is everywhere in the UK.
In Britain
like
it is.
It is in the UK. Yeah, exactly. It is very, very frequent that you'll find a British Golden Ale. And I mean, going through like the style definition, right? Like it's not too surprising. You have a really pale beer, obviously per the name, Golden Ale, really pale beer that is fairly well hopped. But certainly less than like our American pale ales, way less than our IPAs. But just a really clean hop character that is earthy, and then we'll go into this a little bit, but citrusy character is typically marked as optional. I don't necessarily agree that it is, but have a low, it's a lower ABV, easy drinking, crisp beer with a good hop character and like a restrained, sometimes like biscuity malt character in order to support that hop presence. And you have Golden Ale, and it's just so delicious, and it's a very good. It's a very good style. It's very underrepresented. Like I almost think of it more akin to something like a blonde ale than a cream ale, where it is maybe a little bit hoppier, and then obviously English ingredients are really defining it.
Well, so when again you mentioned earlier something about maybe the reason we're not seeing so much specifically marketed as British Golden Ale beers on tap in America is because they're selling it as blonde ale, or they're selling it as something else. Sure. I've here House of Pendragon has their Excalibur blonde ale, and one of the original iterations of that recipe, which I was lucky enough to see the recipe for, was basically what you would call a British Golden Ale. I mean, it was hopped with some American hops, some English hops. It was fermented with the Fuller strain. It was very pale. I mean, it would be really easy for them to market that as a British Golden Ale. They called it a blonde ale, and so there's also that. I think there's a kind of regional distinctions, and we kind of touched on this in a previous episode, but this element of, and I think it's a lot of fun in the beer and brewing world, this element of pride with what you call something, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it plays, I mean, it not only is it obviously a point of pride in terms of like the actual production, but it is setting expectations for consumers on what they're getting into. If you're going to recognize a blonde ale as something specific as opposed to a British Golden Ale, then it makes sense to call it a blonde ale. It makes sense to market it in that way, because it's setting you up for, hey, this isn't going to just taste like EKG or Fuggles. Right. Like it's going to taste like citrusy, which appropriate in a golden ale, but it is necessarily something that I think especially American consumers have tons of like a mental model for.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So this is just to break it down into the different components here. When we're talking about British Golden Ale in terms of the way it looks, we're aiming for a nice yellow, straw to golden in color, about 2 to 6 SRM. Typically very, very clear with a brilliant white cap of foam. In my experience, that's pretty easy to accomplish by using mostly Maris Otter or Pale Two-Row, maybe some Pilsner tossed in there as well. Pretty much, the way this thing looks, you want it to kind of match what you'd get, poured out of a Budweiser tap or something.
Yeah, malt-wise, you're spot on. Like Maris Otter is popular. Golden Promise is really, really popular. I was actually talking so Malcolm brews a ton of British Golden Ale. Loves the style. Has done a couple commercial British Golden Ales, and that's that's one of the things that it typically comes up is that you will very frequently see really low SRM malts. And if you are using like a darker Maris Otter, you might see something like a lager malt cut into that base malt as like blended into it, just because it's going to reduce that SRM quite a bit. And that's, I mean, 2 to 6 SRM is very light. It's very light beer. You want it to be incredibly clear. And you don't want it necessarily to be like an overwhelming base malt character either. And Golden Promise is a great example of a base malt that isn't necessarily overpowering. Maris Otter with blended in, like a simple 2-row or a lager malt. It definitely are solid malt options as you're going through it. Even looking at like the rest of the malt bill, like you're typically not going to see anything that's really dark. Like I know there's an example of a pretty classic example, and it's listed in the BJCP guidelines. Old Golden Hen uses like Old Speckled Hen. So it's Old Golden Hen, and they use amber malt. I can't imagine they use much of it because for the most part, most examples I see are using either 100% base malt or a blend of base malts. Sometimes you'll see some biscuit malt, like really low percentages. More often than not, if there is like some kind of ulterior malt, I see like wheat. I see like a white wheat or a torrefied wheat, something that is still low SRM, but is going to both contribute to like head retention and just in general be a supporting malt character aside from just that base malt. But not a lot. I see some Carahel too, but not a lot of specialty malt in this malt bill as far as it goes. It's all really light stuff.
Yeah. Since we're talking specifically about malt and grist makeup and whatnot right now, another thing that I've seen and I've actually done in my British Golden Ale is to really drive attenuation and keep the beer light on the palate. You'll see doses of sugar, simple sugar. Maybe that's dextrose or sucrose. People might use some flaked maize or some rice. I mean, really, you start, as we talk about it, you start to see how it parallels with, light lagers and such. And to me, I've really gotten into, I remember when I first started brewing and I'd hear people using sugar to supplement their, the wort prior to pitching the yeast. And it would immediately throw my mind into, oh God, like Mr. Beer Kit, but you just don't do that. It works really well. I mean, it's a great way to boost ABV without adding thickness or without adding, weight to the beer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as we're going through it, like it almost sounds like flaked rice would actually be probably a little delicious in a small percentage within a blonde ale. But you're absolutely right. Like it's another lever we have at our disposal is just simple sugars, invert sugars, and simple syrups. Just all of these things can be used to, because really, I mean, a British Golden Ale, you're looking at like 4% ABV. Right. It's fairly low. I know the range is probably, I think it's like 3.5 to 5 or something like that, but you're looking at about 4% alcohol because it's meant to be a beer that you can it's not meant to be a beer that you're getting drunk on, like you're having 1 or 2 pints and you're stumbling home, right? Like it's a easy drinking beer. Yeah.
You want 6 or 7 pints before you stumble home.
Yeah, exactly. You're at that bar for a while.
Yeah, that's right.
But you have that beer and it's definitely a crisp finish. You don't want it like heavy or lingering on the palate too much, and so a little bit of sugar, I'm sure, will go a long way. I've definitely seen that in some recipes as well.
Yeah. So from a stats perspective, the BJCP says that a British Golden Ale is going to be anywhere between 1038 OG and 1053 OG, and like you said, Matt, we're looking at 3.8 to 5% ABV in total. You can, a lot of BGA recipes out there are just going to be straight up Maris Otter or straight up Golden Promise. I've actually never used Golden Promise. I've used a bunch of craft malts and such that apparently are kind of modeled after Golden Promise, but I've never used the real stuff. I do know that Maris Otter adds, in my experience, when you use it as 100% of the grist, Maris Otter just adds this fullness, this full malt character that's slightly nutty, slightly biscuity, but kind of gets out of the way fairly quickly. I love it. I love the stuff. It's probably my favorite pale ale malt. So.
Yeah, Maris Otter is a super, not only just popular, but like especially even styles that we would consider Golden Promise the hallmark, like, Scottish ales specifically.
Yeah, right.
You see Maris Otter commercially a ton in that space of making Scottish ales. And so it is absolutely appropriate, especially if you can keep it golden, like keep it light in terms of just the overall ABV or the overall SRM. And if you do need to pull back a little bit and blend in like a lager malt or something lower, like it's not going to do you any harm.
Yeah, no. So aromatically speaking, when it comes to BGA, the primary source of hop aromatics are likely to come, is particularly if you're over in the UK drinking British Golden Ale, are likely to come from traditional classic English hop varieties. We're talking Fuggles, EKG, maybe some tradition. The thing about when I talk about English hops or when I think about them, the Fuggles are one of my favorites. People hate it. EKG, people love it. I'm not a big fan. So it's kind of interesting. You get to kind of pick and choose. And to me, these hop varieties, that'd be a fun experiment, actually, is Fuggles versus EKG. And we're talking about East Kent Goldings for those who may not know acronyms. Sorry, initialisms. We got corrected on that recently.
It is an initialism.
It's an initialism.
Yeah, I saw that correction.
Yeah. But I'm curious what your preference is for British Golden Ale. I know that the BJCP also says that being a modern style, a lot of British Golden Ales will rely to some degree on more citrusy American varieties. I think they're primarily referring to Cascade and Centennial.
Yeah. The English hops I typically see, like you said, EKG, Fuggles, Tradition, Challenger, some of those. I really like Challenger, actually. I think Challenger is an underrated hop for sure. I think it's really good. I personally prefer EKG because there is like a almost tea-like character to it that I really like.
That is exactly what I loathe about it. It's so gross. It's so tea-like and
it is. It's a little tea-like, and it's. I think it's really pleasant. I think it adds a really nice dimension to it. But so on that. In that same thought, though, like you mentioned that primarily you see English hops. Commercially speaking, and personally, like my personal opinion, I really love the presence of American hops and citrus hop character in the aroma and the flavor in British Golden Ales. That is typically like a Cascade, a Centennial. I've seen some that are Citra. There's a really famous example out there that I believe it's the Crouch Vale Brewer's Gold that uses Galaxy, actually.
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah, I'm pretty positive that's the one that uses Galaxy. But regardless, or Amarillo is definitely another one. But like those fruity American hops, and like some of the piney ones like Centennial see some use and see some presence, but really the citrus character is what we are leaning into in a British Golden Ale, and I have a hard time saying that it's not required. Like it's not required, obviously. Like,
right.
And definitely even per the BJCP ingredients, like, the citrusy American hops are noted as being common. Like there's something that can show up. It doesn't necessarily say required, obviously. But I think they have such a ubiquitous presence in a lot of these classic styles. It's hard to say that you shouldn't use them. Like if I was going to go after my best British Golden Ale ever, I would be using probably Cascade and possibly Citra. See,
in my experience designing British Golden Ales, I have this weird, it's like a tick, and then I got it. I cannot. If I'm going to design a British Golden Ale, I want it to be so specifically British and not American Blonde Ale that I make sure to do things that are distinct from the way that I brew an American Blonde Ale. And
Sure.
so one of my things is using pretty much all English ingredients, and that includes the yeast, that includes the malt, that includes the hops. And so my thing is I'll use hops that I know can impart an edge of citrus or some stuff that you might kind of perceive as being more of that American character. I've not made a British Golden Ale specifically intended to be a British Golden Ale with American hops. I always stick with. I love Fuggles, and then sometimes I'll even dose the 60-minute edition with some Magnum just to get that bitterness. But I'm reserving most of the hop additions for late because it's not a high IBU beer.
No, not by any means. Like in terms of IBU, you're really it's anywhere from like 20 to 45. So
right.
like we kind of alluded to earlier, it's not quite a pale ale. I mean, I think there's some pale ales that would fall in that category, but I think you wouldn't usually think of it that way. But definitely typically hoppier than what we'd see in like an American blonde ale for sure.
Right. Well, and it's interesting you bring up pale ale because as I was reading through the 2015 BJCP guidelines, they make a note that British Golden Ale is more similar in character to American Pale Ale than a pale lager, even though it was inspired by pale lager. And to me, the British Golden Ales that I've had are far more similar to American Blonde Ale than American Pale Ale. Because, when I think of a classic American Pale Ale, you pour out a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and it is copper in color. That's not golden in my book. That is copper. It's almost amber, but that's the classic look of an American Pale Ale. To me, the difference between the main difference between when I've brewed them, a American Blonde Ale and a British Golden Ale, is that level of bitterness. And then again, American Blonde Ale is usually a bit cleaner, maybe less ester character, though British Golden Ales, they'll ferment slightly cool sometimes to restrain those esters, even though they're using something like the Whitbread Dry strain or the Fuller strain.
Yeah, the Whitbread Dry strain's a great one. I think you're right. Like, I definitely, it is in a gray area between those styles, and then obviously utilizing primarily English ingredients, except for the addition of American hops, which, not obviously, like you've noted, isn't always required, but it's just something that is typically there. But definitely the yeast that you're using, like the Fuller strain versus the Whitbread Dry strain, both classics, both in my experience and just from what I typically see in other recipes. You can ferment a little cooler. You still want like a really you want a moderately well attenuating strain at least. You want to make sure that this thing is crisp. You want to make sure it comes off dry, that it doesn't necessarily have any residual sugar. But at the same time, a little bit of fruity esters from the yeast are appropriate. Like, it's definitely something that could be intermingled alongside the citrusy American hops and then the earthy herbal English hops. It's absolutely still appropriate in like a restrained, limited quantity, but this isn't one of the ones where you're like pumping the British yeast at like 72 or 75 degrees Fahrenheit in order to really express those esters.
100%. It is still a British Golden Ale. There's got to be,
exactly.
In my mind, we're going to call it that for a reason. And at least over here in America, where the BJCP is written, I feel like that's sort of what we're referring to, and why we distinguish it is because it has these unique characteristics. So that's basically what a British Golden Ale is going to smell, taste like. And mouthfeel wise, you're looking for a nice, crisp, lightweight type of experience in your mouth. And again, you can accomplish that by using things like flaked maize in place of some malt, rice and sugar and whatnot. Let's spend some time talking about the way a brewer who's using completely normal brewing methods might go about doing this, and perhaps start with water chemistry first. I know a lot of people are these days, thankfully, are starting off with blank slate RO water. Maybe they're using distilled water, something like that. What kind of water profile might we aim for this style?
So, like I said in the beginning, I talked to Malcolm quite a bit about this, and I wanted to get his thoughts just because he's done a few of them commercially, and he's done a lot of research into them. And he mentioned treating his water profile like a pale ale profile, right? Like, because you are sort of in pursuit of that kind of a beer, really. Like it's in, like it says in the BJCP guidelines, like it tends to be pretty similar to a pale ale. In my experience, I tend to prefer it like a little dialed back from like the pale ale profile that's in brewing water. Like, I don't necessarily want to have too much mineral character into it, as long as it's at 50 ppm calcium. And then I usually do like a 2 or 2.5 to 1 ratio for like sulfate to chloride. But yeah, like a pale ale profile or a light hoppy profile that is not super tons of salts, I think tends to be really, really nice in these beers.
Yeah, so pale ale profile, when I hear that, I think, higher sulfate to chloride. You're really trying to push the crispness. You're trying to make the hop character pop and be noticeable. I've read a lot online about people brewing these British Golden Ale styles with more of a balanced sulfate to chloride ratio. I'm with Malcolm. I tend to prefer slightly higher sulfate to chloride, but that's kind of the case for me with every beer. That's one of those one of those things that across the palette of beer styles, I kind of just prefer that higher sulfate water chemistry. So that's my starting place. One of the fun things about water chem is, and we know that it has an impact, is if you make a batch with higher sulfate to chloride and it's just a bit too sharp for you, next batch you just dial back that sulfate and try it with a little bit higher chloride and see what you think. So really, dialing in what you prefer for your water profile for any style, I think is kind of one of the fun parts of homebrewing. Typically for this style, when you mash, you're going to take those grains, mash in, let it sit for a standard 60-minute mash rest. Collect your wort. You're going to collect the wort into a boil kettle, and you're going to boil it for 60 minutes. I think, a lot of people these days are still under and I think it is, I don't want to use the word myth or lie or anything like that, but this idea that boiling an extra 90 or extra 30 minutes, so up to 90, is in some way going to caramelize and add that English kind of, caramel richness to it. I just don't think that's the case. At the very least, all you're doing is condensing the wort, which if you've planned for that, you can do the same with a 60-minute boil.
Yeah, I don't quite buy that, and definitely, like, in terms of the boil length, like, one of the determining factors for a lot of people is just like the hop additions that you're going for and the rate at which you're adding them. And typically, like you mentioned earlier, like you might see a Magnum or just a higher alpha acid at the beginning of that boil, like 60. You might see then, I think I really like when it's usually like a blend of either Fuggles and EKG, or and then Cascade or something similar at like the 30-25 minute like flavor range, and then late in the boil, like 10-5 minutes, I usually go with more Cascade. You might go with like something like Fuggles, but then your aroma addition, and that's really all you have to go after in the boil. So 60 minutes seems to make sense just if you're following that schedule. You could probably, obviously you could get away with 30 if you're adjusting for it, but in terms of like lengthening the boil beyond that for caramelization, I don't quite buy that.
Yeah, and people argue that, Maillard reactions, promise you that's not happening in a boil. For the most part, for most homebrewers, that's not happening. So once the boil is complete, the wort is chilled, racked over to a fermentation chamber. It's important because of the more clean nature of British Golden Ale. You'll read of the importance of pitching a nice, healthy, a slug of yeast, and maybe ferment it a bit cooler than typical, down say around 16 or 17 C, which is around 62 to 64 degrees Fahrenheit, just to suppress the ester development. You're still going to get a bit more, arguably, if you're using something like Imperial Yeast A09 Pub or A01 House. Those are the Fullers and the Whitbread strains, respectively. Mm-hmm. Again, this is a style that was inspired, at the very least, by the growth of mass market lagers and just clean, drinkable beers like that. So you want to keep the beer clean, but still with that hint of British funness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to describe it. And just going in after you've gone through fermentation pretty standard. I mean, really, these beers are meant to be brilliantly clear. Like the examples I've seen and really loved are just great clarity. So if you filter or fine your beers, now is the time post fermentation. If you are having clear beer out of the fermenter, or if you are just like letting it sit for a while and condition, do that too. But you want really solid clarity on these beers. It's a great hallmark of the style, and it just makes it look, in my opinion, really drinkable. Like,
absolutely,
just clear, like it looks so. When I see cloudier beer, I don't necessarily I probably do have a bias against it that I'm like somewhat not aware of as I'm like talking about it.
Unless it's intended to be cloudy, Matt. If it's intended to be cloudy, then it's all good.
If it is, I know. You're absolutely right. But this one is definitely not.
Absolutely, and one of the great things to me about British Golden Ale, of the many wonderful things about it, is that mouthfeel, that crisp, easy drinking thing, high carbonation paired with that low FG. I think the BJCP says this one is intended to finish around 1006 to 1012. I mean, how many other English/British styles are finishing as low as 1006? What's that, 1.5 degrees Plato, something like that. That's really low. Pair that with a nice sparkle. They will say, BJCP even notes in the guidelines that draft versions in England of British Golden Ale will likely have low to moderate carbonation. I think that whole cellar serving thing is just it just happens over there, and so you're going to get that. I've had British Golden Ale that was served off cask, and or not off cask, but off of an engine. Absolutely delicious. Don't get me wrong. But I'm telling you, a nice, well-carbonated, maybe around 2.5 volumes of carbonation, nice cap of foam fizzing in your mouth. It is so absolutely delicious, and it's so dry and washes off your palate so fast. It's making me thirsty.
Definitely the carbonation will help it do that, right? Like it's definitely going to help you, this perception of dryness, absolutely, and this perception of crispness, like definitely carbonation will lend itself to that. But like you noted, if you're having this thing on draft in the UK, then you are typically getting a low to moderate carbonation, definitely a bit lower. And you know what, like it's growing on me, especially like with all the Scottish ales I've been going through that follow a similar carbonation pattern. I think it can be really, really good. I really like that, but definitely you have some flexibility here. I mean, if you want to go after like, oh, this is possibly how it would be in a pub style, then low to moderate carbonation. If you just like the crispness and the mouthfeel that the higher carbonation adds, go for it. Like, go with 2.5, go a little higher, push it a little bit, and that'll be fine too. Yeah. That's the thing. I really enjoy going to a British pub, whether it's over here, in the States, or, in the homeland over there, and just having a nice cellar temperature, low carbonation pull off of an engine. It's absolutely delicious. That doesn't mean I can't absolutely enjoy more fizzy versions of this style. And I do. Again, the way that I think about this often is this is a very modern 1986 is what they're saying. It was the first basically documented, we've got this style now. That's very new. And modern beers tend to have a higher carbonation, obviously, than they used to in the past. I prefer that. I love that. And so for me, British Golden Ale being inspired by, fizzy yellow lager, that's just my jam. I'll do the carbonation thing up to where when I pour it, you see the sparkle coming up through that crystal clear, beautiful British Golden Ale that to me smells of flowers and mushrooms and wonderful toasty malt. I love it. Absolutely. And it's maybe worth noting that, definitely, I know in the mid 1980s is when, we attribute this style to it being developed. It was almost certainly brewed prior to that. In varying iterations, whether or not it was mass produced or whether or not it looks exactly like the style does now, it most certainly was brewed in other ways, in very similar ways. But in terms of you mentioned, because it has grown since that period of time and what it's been inspired by, when we think about a good British Golden Ale. Yeah. Obviously you've noted you like a little bit higher carbonation, and then there's some flexibility in what that looks like. I personally I think a light Cascade dry hop, a really minimal, can help bring out the citrus character a lot, and really just make it it can help it stand out a little bit in that regard without necessarily making it too hoppy. I think I always really love that. When I have a British Golden Ale, I want the aroma to be earthy, obviously, but also I want the citrus character to be apparent. I want to have that citrus hop character pretty up front. And that's personal. So, but a clear beer with a nice head, good citrus, and a little bit of earthy hop character, I think makes it stand out really well. And then just, to me, what really defines the British Golden Ale is just that it is the drinkability of it. Like you've mentioned a little bit with the carbonation, you should be able to have this beer and be ready for another sip. You don't want to sit and linger on the palate. That's, to me, the key of all the beers that we consider to be sessionable or just easy drinking beers, is the actual drinkability of them. Yeah,
you sip it, it gets out of the way. And Matt, I'm telling you, you've given me some ideas for my next batch of British Golden Ale. Well, we obviously share an affinity for British Golden Ale and have made numerous batches on our own with tried and true techniques. Not the case for a batch you recently made where numerous corners were cut. Results when we return.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or glycol chiller at grainfather.com. Once again, that's grainfather.com.
The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the brew bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the brew bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a brew bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you, and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. I've made numerous batches of British Golden Ale in my day. In fact, my Tiny Bottom Pale Ale recipe, which happens to be the most often viewed on Brewlosophy.com, is sort of a spin-off of this delicious style. Matt, you were hankering to have one on tap a while back and brewed one up using short and shoddy methods.
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically always hankering to have one on tap.
Yeah.
So I ended up brewing this for the short and shoddy. It was one of the first times that I'd gone through and really, tried to cut all these corners, essentially, is really like make all these changes to my typical process.
How nervous were you?
Honestly, I wasn't that nervous because like going through it, the things that I changed were not things that I necessarily thought were going to have like too radical an effect. There was definitely some moments where I was like, this feels a little like heretical, like a little bit of heresy, to be honest. But just like prepping for it and like starting to brew this beer, I got my full volume of filtered water, which I used like my tap water that had been filtered. I normally start with RO, but this was like part of my short and shoddies. I just didn't go to the store to do it. And I unfortunately did forget to do mineral adjustments with it, which I didn't realize till after the fact. So it was kind of a fun thing to tack on to my shoddy brew days that I did not adjust it anymore.
Yeah, you can forget whatever you want when you're brewing this way, Matt. It's
yeah,
just
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So I set the water heating up, milled those grains. I went with what is it's actually just convenient that I had these things on hand. I had some Pilsner malt that I needed to get rid of, that I was just burning through that bag, and I wanted to finish it out and get the storage container back. So I used about 75% Maris Otter in this grain bill, and then 25% Pilsner malt blended into that.
A great way to lighten up the body of that beer, as opposed to adding sugar. In my opinion, adding a nice little dose of Pilsner malt is a wonderful way to throw something that's not going to get in the way, kind of lighten up the weight of the beer, and really just kind of give you that crisp drinkability that you're after.
Yeah, and typically draw back the SRM a bit too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah.
So single infusion batch, I went with 153 degrees Fahrenheit or 67 C for about 20 minutes before removing the grains. And so my brew in a bag system, the Unibrew, because like I don't necessarily have like a mash out, or I don't Vorloff or drain to another kettle. I just remove the grains. So it's like kind of just the end of that process is grains are now gone. So after that 20 minutes, that was it. And I boiled them for also only 20 minutes. So again, like I wasn't necessarily nervous, but I did feel wrong in a lot of ways.
And rushed perhaps.
That dogma is so ingrained into me. And even despite like a lot of the work we do at Brewlosophy, like I am at heart probably a pretty strong dogmatist in a lot of ways. So just part of me was revolting against this. But 20-minute boil, I had EKG at 20, about 57 grams, about 114 grams of EKG at the 5-minute mark. And this was sort of a fun idea. I don't remember how we had it. I know it was something we came up with like as a group that was just going to be funny for this. I just like threw in Cascade pellets. I didn't measure them at all. I just kind of eyeballed, okay, it's probably this much Cascade.
At Flame Out or something like 5. That. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, after all the years, like I think I could probably do a batch that way. I'm pretty positive I could like roughly know how much grain is in my mill at a certain time. So we'll see. It might be the next short and Shoddies. I just don't measure things. So after that, ran the wort through the Accelerator Max directly into the PET carboy. Got it down to about 77 degrees Fahrenheit, a little higher than I typically would want it to pitch at, but not too bad, and definitely like warm enough that or cool enough that the yeast will survive. So I wasn't super worried. I took a refractometer reading around this time and ended up with that 20-minute mash. I got 64% mash efficiency, or extraction. It was a 1046 OG.
That's awesome.
It was way lower than it was like, I think I had anticipated like 1052 or 1054 or something like that. But 1046, 64% is for a 20-minute mash was not bad.
No, not bad at all. That's good.
So I ended up going through that. Like I said, 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 25 degrees C is a little warmer than I'd like, but this was a short and shoddy batch, so no hydration or anything like that. I had a pack of Safale SO4 that I needed to use, so I directly pitched that into the carboy, and then I placed that carboy in my basement bathroom in my old townhouse, and then it maintained about 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees C in that room.
So you pitched a pack of Safale SO4, which I believe is the Whitbread strain, not Whitbread Dry.
Yes,
I think that's the
correct.
classic Whitbread. Yep. So if you're using something like AO1 House, that is the Whitbread Dry strain, very common among liquid yeast labs. They have that. SO4, I'm not sure anyone is offering, at least regularly, in liquid form. And you pitched that at 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 25 degrees Celsius, and then just placed it in, just to clarify, just placed it in your basement bathroom and let it drop whatever it was going to drop by sitting down in this 20 degrees C or 68 degrees Fahrenheit environment.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely did. I pitched it at that 77 degrees Fahrenheit,
right.
Or maybe it was like 76 by then or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't anything else or let it sit. It was just whatever it eventually cooled to. So that room was about 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 C, just due to the thermal, like just because of fermentation. I'm sure it got much warmer than that 68 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
But that's about what the room was at. So between me like starting this brew day and pitch, I guess maybe like between my mash in and between my between like pitching that yeast, it was about 2 hours as a brew day.
That feels good, right? I mean, on some level.
So I had so much spare time. I didn't know what to do with the rest of my Sunday. Like it was
enjoy
crazy.
it. Yeah.
About 8 hours later, I saw some fermentation activity, and that's maybe not too surprising, just based on the fact it's a moderate OG. It was pretty warm, so I'm sure the yeast was thrilled about that. And about 8 hours, fermentation took off. I waited about a week, and all signs of fermentation had died down. So I took a hydrometer reading, and the beer had reached an FG of 1010. Perfect. So I'm pretty happy with that final gravity. Proceeded with kegging that beer. I didn't cool it. I usually do. And then I kegged it into a keg that I had not purged of oxygen. It was pretty just, I racked directly into this keg it was really not a tight cold side process.
Sloppy kegging. That's right.
I know. It was another thing where in my heart I was like, felt wrong. It was another part of me revolting against it.
Even I'm not that shoddy, Matt. I'm still a nut when it comes to packaging processes. But.
So after about 24 hours in my keezer, it had lowered to a point where I was comfortable adding some gelatin, and then I burst carbonated overnight and then reduced the gas to serving pressure. So I gave it a couple days to condition with the gelatin and drop clear, and then I started serving it to tasters. So really, I mean, less than 2 weeks, this beer was drinking.
That's awesome. So anybody who wants to look at the pictures of the brewing process or this beautiful, beautiful beer can go do so. The link is down in the description of this episode. The beer was absolutely golden. It was clear. It was beautiful. It was the foam on it looked wonderful. Of course, you can't taste or smell beer through a computer screen. And so what did you think of it? Before we talk about the blind taster results, what were your thoughts about this beer, having had British Golden Ales that were brewed using much tighter methods in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally really, really enjoyed this beer. I thought it was great. I think that I don't think there's anything that was wrong with it that I would attribute actually to the short and shoddy process.
Right.
There's some changes I think I would make. Basically, I didn't dry hop this one. I probably would have. There wasn't as much like Cascade character as I would have liked typically. But overall, I mean, I really, really enjoyed this beer. I thought that it was a good example of the style for sure. So I've had Safale's SO4 before, and I typically don't remember really caring for it.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I don't. I still kind of have that idea in my head that I don't really care for it. But I didn't. I expected it to be more of an estery mess than it was, just based on the fact that I probably underpitched a little bit, or I probably moderately pitched with Safale, but it was also. I don't know how much survived the actual hydrate, because I didn't hydrate it properly, which is another thing that messes with me. Though I believe Fermentis now recommends not hydrating their yeasts. That's a new one. But anyways, I mean, I expected it to be, especially the warmer temperatures with the fermentation process, but it definitely did not have like a super. It didn't have a super estery character. My only real complaint, besides the fact that I probably would have dry hopped it or something. I feel like I perceived a very, very slight creamed corn note. To me, that is reminiscent of DMS. That's typically how I perceive it. I know that I only boiled for 20 minutes, and that's possible that it came from there. The fact that I didn't boil for that long. It also might just be from the fact that because I know that I boiled it for 20 minutes, you know what I mean? Like there's always this possibility that it's me, my impressions being imprinted on my perception there.
Which is exactly why we serve these beers to tasters who don't know what the brewing process was. Right. And you did just that. 21 different tasters, again, had no idea how you brewed it, just that it was a beer that you made. And now this short and shoddy was completed a while back, before we started informing tasters of the style, before they evaluate it. Nowadays, we let tasters know up front, and this was based on a bunch of listener and reader feedback. We now let tasters know what the style is before they go in and evaluate it. Surprisingly, though, without knowing what it was and being asked to guess what style it was, out of all of the BJCP styles, 4 people thought it was a British Golden Ale. So that alone, to me, is kind of a success. 4 out of 21 people. Another 4 picked English IPA. 4 more thought it was an American Pale Ale, and yet another 4 felt it resembled a blonde ale. I think 2 people also chose Ordinary Bitter. You clump that together, that's pretty good, actually. It's all of those styles, you could say, sort of resemble a British Golden Ale.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty happy with that spread as well. just alone the fact that 4 people chose British Golden Ale, the fact that 4 people knew what a British Golden Ale was,
right?
That is
Exactly.
that is astounding to me. And obviously, I go to a lot of homebrew clubs, so this was obviously like people who are thinking about beer, at least. Whether or not you think they're more or less reliable than the beer drinking public is irrelevant.
Yeah.
But it's at least people who think about beer and who are aware of these different styles that exist. So it's maybe not too surprising, but I was very surprised that people selected British Golden Ale at all. Even though I do think it, resembled one fairly well. But yeah, that spread is fairly normal. And just in terms of what people thought of it, on average, the strongest characteristic that people noted in this beer was the hop character. It was, people typically noted it as being like a 3.6 out of 5, and the maltiness and the dryness were about a 2.5 out of 5. So definitely pretty representative of what we would expect a British Golden Ale to show.
Absolutely. This is British Golden Ale is one of those styles I feel sort of has some leeway in how you maybe preference based, but with hoppiness getting that 3.6 out of 5 average rating, and then outdoing maltiness and dryness, that does really kind of go to what we talked about earlier with British Golden Ale being slightly akin to an American Pale Ale. Certainly, if I'm serving somebody an American Blonde Ale, I would expect that maltiness to kind of go a little bit heavier than the hop character there, a little bit higher rating. But still, 3.6 out of 5, and then the maltiness and the dryness, both 2.5 out of 5. I think kind of jibes pretty well with BJCP description of a British Golden Ale. When those tasters were asked more specifically about the hop, malt, and yeast character, 6 out of 21 ended up saying that it was mostly earthy. 6 out of 21 felt it was floral, and then 5 out of 21 selected pine and resinous. That just seems right in line with what I would expect for British Golden Ale.
It definitely does. It's in line, and this is actually one of the things that reinforces for me, like, I wish I had dry hopped this beer with Cascade, which is what I normally would have done, because I would hope, for me, like, my own preference is that citrus would be more recognizable as a hop character in it. But earthy, floral, and then, pine resin doesn't seem to be too surprising that shows up.
No.
But absolutely, it is definitely in line with the style. And it's one of those things I would probably tweak in the future is more Cascade, or a controlled amount of Cascade, or a small Cascade dry hop.
Sure. I think the dry hop thing is interesting and would definitely contribute more of that citrusy aroma. In terms of malt, again, no surprise here. 8 out of the 21 people chose cracker and bread crust. Another said that the malt character was nutty. So you got 16 out of 21 going with crackery, bready, nutty, and then another 5 went with caramel and sweet, which I don't quite understand, but I do believe that certain hops, especially in my experience, things like EKG, can kind of contribute this impression of sweetness. It's almost marmalade-like.
I'm a little worried that caramel sweet character is indicative of oxidation from the kegging process. Just because this was like very not controlled at all, and like pretty exposed to air, and also was out of a PET carboy that it's not a closed transfer into an open carboy. It's just totally open on both ends. My gut would be, just like reviewing the process that I went through, my gut would be there. That said, it might be a little bit of like the Maris Otter combined with the hop character, and just like get a little bit of that sweet character. My gut would say that it's probably a little bit of oxidation.
It's impossible to tell.
There's no way for us to nail it down, especially this far in the future. Like I don't have the beer with me anymore, but definitely it's possible.
There are definitely reasons that I no longer keg using that method. I went years kegging using that method and not having issues that I was aware of, at the very least. So I know that it can work.
Oh yeah.
But that is, again, there are reasons that even when I'm doing short and shoddy beers, a lot of people think that the idea is to screw up a batch. No. My whole point with the short and shoddy thing is how many corners can I cut while maintaining good beer. So for me, packaging is so important that I'm not gonna cut too many corners there. So when it comes to yeast character, tasters, this one's pretty interesting to me. It was evenly split basically between esters and clean. If that doesn't sound like British Golden Ale to you, I don't know what does. You got 11 out of 21 tasters indicated ester fermentation character, and then the other 10 indicated it was nice and clean.
Yeah, and definitely. It is right in line with what we would typically expect. If there is ester character, it's pretty light. Maybe some people don't pick up on it. Also, people in the beginning of this, a couple people chose American Pale Ale, a couple people chose Blonde Ale.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much their expectations for those styles influence what they're picking up on yeast character now that
Absolutely.
they've selected that.
Absolutely.
So it's definitely a little up in the air, but I'm perfectly happy with that. And like I said in the beginning, like when I was going through it, I expected it to be much more estery than it was based on the practices I was using.
Right.
And it really wasn't. It was not bad at all.
Well, and I think it needs to be reiterated here that at this point, when we're using this old survey, the tasters have all the way through this point in the survey, they don't know what style it is. They are rating it, and this was a part of the problem that we found with this old survey. They're rating it based on now what they think it is,
Right,
if they think
exactly.
they're correct. So
they've set their own anchor for this process.
Exactly. So again, they know not that this is a short and shoddy beer. They just know that Matt served them this really pretty looking beer in a glass. That's it. 3 of the tasters, only 5 people out of the 21 noted any off flavors at all. 3 of them felt that they detected DMS, which is sort of in line with what you were saying, Matt, though I've got a comment on that. 2 people indicated esters, and I wonder how many people did that because they felt that the yeast character was estery. Because you drink something like a Pilsner, and yeah, ester character is going to be an off flavor. Something like a British Golden Ale, not so much. You kind of expect it there a little bit, I guess. About the DMS, I've said this before. I feel like a lot of people mistake malt character, that maltiness from a malt like Maris Otter, for a corny, in which they associate with DMS, kind of a corny character. If you take just malt and you ferment it out, just a straight Pilsner malt or Maris Otter, and don't add any hops to it. If anybody's ever done this, or if you've tried your starter sample, it has a richness that could be easily mistaken. This is why I'm not a big fan of the creamed corn description for DMS. In my experience with flavor standards, DMS smells like ketchup that you've left out for 3 or 4 days. It's just got this weird kind of tomatoey thing going on. I've never gotten corn from it, but I get a really malty thing from certain styles that I could see how people might mistake for that corniness. Maybe I'm wrong here, but
I don't think you're wrong. I definitely get cream corn from DMS, which is just something I know from treated samples,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But you're 100% right that there is a problem with the way in which we talk about off flavors, is that not only like style expectations, but specifically the way in which we perceive something is going to be different based on who you are, your taste buds, your expectations, what you have experience with, what your mental anchors are for different flavors, different profiles. And so when we hear like, oh, it's like, oh, I'm tasting this and I taste a little bit of like a green pepper or a vegetal.
Right.
Someone can say, oh, you're tasting oxidized roasted malts. You're tasting that for green pepper. And it's like, well, maybe it is just something they associate with a vegetal character that could be from hop character.
Sure.
So we tend to be like, oh, I taste DMS. It's like, no, you don't taste DMS. You taste something that you associate with DMS.
Right.
And in knowing how you personally interpret those chemical compounds is important.
Yeah.
I think that's
Amen.
what it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. So at this point in the survey, the tasters were told what the style was and given a description of it. And then they were asked to rate how representative your version of the beer, which again, they still don't know that it's short and shoddy, how well it represents British Golden Ale. Nobody gave it a 5 out of 5. That's kind of the halo effect, I believe is what it's referred to. A lot of people don't want to go 5 out of 5 or 0 out of 5. 10 of the 21 people rated it a 4 out of 5, which is pretty doggone good. And then another 8 gave it a 3 out of 5. The last 3 gave it a 2 out of 5. You got to remember, this is a 0 out of 5 scale. So it's actually 6 options here. To have 18 people give it a 3 out of 5 or higher, I think it suggests that it's fairly representative of the British Golden Ale style.
And if it had been dry hopped with Cascade, it would have all been 5 out of 5 because it would have been very.
Yeah, sure.
It is. I do think that this was pretty representative of the style. I think that based on the spread that we saw earlier between the styles that people selected.
Yeah.
The people who knew it was a British Golden Ale, I'm sure they have their own opinions on what the style tastes like, so I don't expect a 5 out of 5 from them.
Sure.
And then everyone else, maybe it is halo effect, I'm not sure, or maybe there's just room that it could have been improved and it could have been better represented of the style, which 100% is totally fine with me. So absolutely, I was happy with these results. People seem to be pretty happy with the beer in terms of it being representative of the style, so yeah, I'm good with it.
Yeah, so am I. Those are good numbers in my book. And then the final thing we ask is just for a preference rating. 3 out of the 21 people rated it 5 out of 5, meaning they loved the beer. Another 8 gave it a 4 out of 5, and then 5 each rated it 3 and 2 out of 5. Nothing lower than that. To me, again, this is just suggesting that at least for these tasters, they enjoyed the beer, even though they didn't know what it was. And there is that bias when you are going into a beer not knowing what it is and you are evaluating it. You're noticing things that you wouldn't notice if somebody just handed you a pint and said enjoy. Regardless, it sounds like this was a success. Matt, before we get into some reader comments, which there are many, I'm wondering if you were to go back and do this batch differently, is there anything process-wise that you would change? Ingredient-wise, it sounds like you're going to do a dry hop. But, basically, was there anything from the short and shoddy process that you feel you would change to improve the outcome of this beer?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to follow like a shortened mash, shortened boil, and then like just other practices, I think what I would do is, I know I mentioned a dry hop with Cascade. Definitely, I would lean into that. I think that I would probably have. I think that going through this, I would probably change my kegging procedure. I would probably be a little tighter about how I did that, especially. Just that's something that is important to me. Also, another thing that I would definitely change is I use 75% Maris Otter, 25% Pilsner malt for this. I would probably lower the amount of Pilsner and Maris Otter a little bit to throw in 5-ish to 8-ish% torrefied wheat, I think. I think I would add in some torrefied wheat to this beer, just general practices that I've started to adopt. The other thing I would do is I would probably I don't have that basement bathroom anymore. So I would probably go with either my fermentation chamber just out of necessity. That's where I ferment things now. Or I would probably end up not using Safale SO4. I'd probably end up using something like House Imperial's dry whitbread strain.
Yeah.
That I love that yeast. I also really love the Fuller's strain. So I would probably pick a different yeast. I'd go with Fuller's or the whitbread dry strain in some kind of form. But other than that, I was really happy with the beer. I thought it was a good beer. I enjoyed it. I kicked the keg relatively quickly. There's some things I would tweak, but overall, I was happy with it and surprised how it turned out.
Yeah, that's every time I make one of these short and shoddy batches, in many ways, it kind of keeps me interested in homebrewing after so many years of doing it, because it blows my mind that it works, But here we've got a bunch of reader comments here I'd like to get to before we close out. First one comes from Ray Billick. He says, "I'm giving you a standing ovation for this post. Definitely want to try this. Love the electric setup also. Is there a post that speaks more to your setup? Cheers from the Motor City."
Yeah, Ray, there's 2 now. Sorry to get to this about a year and a half in. There are 2 reviews of the Unibrow systems on the site. There's a Unibrow V2 system, which is what I used at the time for this batch. That is definitely on there. And I have recently upgraded to the V3 system. There's a review on the site for that as well. I really, really like both of the systems. I think that they are really well made. I've had great experiences with them. There's some tweaks that I've made over time, and you can read about those on the site as well. But glad you enjoyed it. Hope you try it out. More exposure to British Golden Ale is the best thing for anyone. So.
Oh, definitely. Well, and I just a comment on, you're using the Brow Supply Unibrow system.
Yes.
I'm using the SS Brewtech 1V. We've got people using claw hammers, all-in-one brewing system. I'm telling you, short and shoddy is great. You can do it using any type of setup. The electric brewing craze right now, and it makes it so easy. We should do an episode all on our experience using electric brewing setups. I never thought I would convert, and it's one of the best things. So Ray, I know, again, this article came out a year and a half ago, but if you haven't gone electric yet, we stand by our decision to go electric ourselves.
Yes,
so
definitely.
It's awesome. Next comment comes from Kieran. He says, "I love Golden Hen from Moreland Brewer. Just looked up some clone recipes, and they've all used golden maple syrup."
Yeah, Marshall, you talked about a little bit earlier in the episode, it's not uncommon to use some kind of a sugar to raise the ABV a little bit without contributing much else to the beer. Them using the golden maple syrup, I'm a little less certain on. Especially in my experience, if it is similar to actual maple syrup character doesn't survive fermentation too well. That seems like it'd be a pretty expensive way to raise the ABV. But that said, I see invert sugar a lot. I see simple syrups a lot. Definitely, it is an opportunity for you to tweak this batch a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's a cheap way to get a little ABV and to try it out.
Yeah, I mean, anything that is basically 100% fermentable, you can use in this. Golden maple syrup makes perfect sense in my book. So,
yeah.
Next comment comes from Jay in Montana. He says, DMS is just the worst to me. I can really taste it in a few commercial beers. Some styles do have a bit intentionally. Those are gross too. Because of this, a 20-minute boil with all the pills malt gives me the heebie-jeebies, but damn, I'd love a 2-hour brew day. Maybe I'll try a 30-30 on my next, I think he means 30-minute mash, 30-minute boil on my next West Coast Pale Ale. Man, you guys are making this hard or easy, he says.
Yeah, man. I mean, I hope that short mash and boil went well. I definitely think that modern. I've gone to a lot of malt talks recently, and I've been listening a lot to different maltsters, and especially what brewers want modern, and what a lot of modern brewers want. And I'm talking about like pro brewers typically, is they want extraction. They want sugar jet fuel extraction, and the way that what that means for a lot of us is that you can get a lot of the sugar, or almost all of the sugar, relatively quickly in these batches. It's definitely something that happens really quick. And then, of course, the boil. I know, is it Gordon Strong who says like the 75-minute boil is like the magic number? Like that 15 minutes is where the magic. It might not be Gordon Strong. Don't quote me on that. But I know a lot of people who swear by 75-minute mash or 75-minute boils for all of their beers. Others, obviously, who say 90 minutes is required for any kind of a Pilsner malt. I've seen some DMS measurements that conflict with that. That you can boil shorter with a lot of modern Pilsner malts, and DMS will be essentially driven off almost entirely. So it's something to think about, but I hope it went well for you. I hope you're still enjoying your beer. And if you want to do full mashes, full boils, please, by all means, do so. There's other opportunities for you to cut down on brew day time, like preheating water and stuff like that. But glad you liked it, man. I hope you have some good British Golden Ale.
Yeah, amen. A final comment comes from Jamie Abbott. He says, wow, a 2-hour brew day with results like that really is something I could get into. Unfortunately, the style over here in the UK is far from, quote, not the most widely known style. Every pub has far too many of these beers on the bar. There's so little variety in the average watering hole.
That is unfortunate to hear, that there's not a lot of variety. It's weird because paradoxically, I wish that American breweries had more of them.
Yeah.
Definitely. And yeah, absolutely correct. That was one of my American-centric comments,
right?
Which I regret. I just globally speaking, British Golden Ale is very, very popular. It sells a lot. It is in a lot of places. So 100% appreciate that correction. I think that is something that is important to keep in mind, is that like the cultures, the style cultures that have evolved in different places, people are drinking different things. So really appreciate that. I hope for some more variety in your watering hole, man.
I know.
And if not, I hope you can brew it. I hope you can make your own variety.
Yeah, I'm sure it probably has school us on it a little bit, but
absolutely.
Hey, listen, I love British Golden Ale, and I've got some ideas based on the conversation that we've had about maybe doing some dry hopping with Cascade, maybe tossing a dose of Centennial towards the end of the boil as well in my next British Golden Ale. That does about cover, I think, fairly well British Golden Ale. Do you have anything else you want to get off your chest before we head out, Matt?
If anyone has other British Golden Ale resources or thoughts, please feel free to send it to us. I would love to learn more about just the different interpretations of the style, different practices people are utilizing. But at the very least, I think this pretty well sets a foundation for, if you want to start exploring British Golden Ale, you are in a position to do so.
Yeah. And if you want to brew it in 2 hours or less,
Right.
Based on these stats here, you can get away with doing that. All right. Remember to head over to brewlosophy.com to read about the recipe discussed in this episode, as well as all of the other stuff we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.